Hey everybody, sorry about today on Zoom. We didn't ever get Zoom opened because there is a outage here at BYUI, and even with my hotspot on my phone, I still wasn't able to get into you could have gotten into Zoom and email if you'd already been into it that morning. So some of those people had it, some people didn't, but I had not logged in yet, and so I did not have anything. And so I would have been okay if I was at home, but I was here on campus. So I apologize. I will do everything we just did in class right now so that you guys can see that. And it wasn't too long. They got out a little early anyway. So um, this is a website that I just threw together. Since I didn't have internet, I just kind of did it on VS Code and not Glitch. I could have gotten into Glitch, but we'll just go with what we already had in class. So they pretty much just watched, and some of them didn't have internet connection, so they couldn't get into Glitch anyway. But this looks a lot like your whitewater rafting page. Everything's just kind of left aligned. There's just HTML. There's no CSS, and it came in. And what I wanted to point out today was that there's different kind of elements. And I was able to get into W3 schools and show the inline versus the block level elements. So when you look at block level elements, they're greedy and they take the entire space that they're in, and which kind of makes it look like they force a carriage return down after each one. And those are things like all these different things here. Navs, all the H1s through H2s and so on, all the LIs, all of those paragraphs, that's a big one. They're all going to be block level elements, taking the whole space that they can. Then there's inline elements, and they usually just take up as much as they need. And they don't have to start on a new line. If there's room for other things, they'll come up next to them, in line with them. And so those would include, the big one is images. So this is important to remember. I wish I had learned this better as a beginning web developer, because it really helps me when it comes to layout. And when you get to layout, that's one of the hardest things to do with web development. Now in this class we're going to get very into grid, which is a way to lay things out. But just for simple little things like centering or things like that, just understanding this block and inline block really helps out a lot. So let's go to the code and let's just take a quick look here. So we have a header with our nav in it, some UL. I have that one picture. Those are my cute girls, my daughters, and their cousins, and they're at Moab. So I did a little Moab text there. And we'll see we have that image there. We have a link here that I'm going to talk about here in a minute that goes to an external website. 3 other external website links that go out here with social media icons. I only had Facebook on my computer this morning when I didn't have internet, so I put them all as Facebook. But one does go to YouTube, one does go to Instagram here. And so instead of text content inside the A or link tag, you are getting an actual image as the link. So when they click on that image, it will go to this website here. Okay, so that's what we have. No CSS yet, but I do have an about style.css that I'm playing with right here, and I'm going to put a few things in here. So now back to the inline and block elements. If I go in here and I select a bunch of my different elements I have on here, I have images, I have paragraphs, I have an H2 with the word Moab in it. I can do something like this. I can put border, and I want my border to be 2 pixels wide, a solid red color. It's going to give this ugly border on everything that I listed there. My list items, my image, my paragraphs. Now notice the block level elements, LI was one of those, even though they're really short, they're greedy and they're taking the whole length that they possibly can. And so it looks like they have kind of like a carriage return on there. But my image is an inline element, and it only takes up as much length space as it needs. And then even like with this little paragraph here in the footer, even though it's really small, it's taking up the whole space. These 3 images are inline again, so they're only taking up what they need. In fact, if I add another image to my HTML here, and save that, you'll see it will go ahead and go in line with the other one if there's room. Now I could force, like we saw the other day, I could force a line break. And that's why some people put these line breaks inside their code. But that's not the proper way to do it. It's going to just mess things up worse than, yeah, it's just confusing. So that's not, you don't put anything that you want, that you can do in CSS inside your HTML. That's just bad practice. So how would I do this? How would I go ahead and maybe center some of these things and things like that? So we could do something like this. We could go into CSS and we could say, okay, I want all my images to, instead of displaying inline, I'm going to force them to be a block level element by saying display this element block. Even though it's an inline one, I want to change it. Then it will force it down. Also forced my social media icons down. Maybe I didn't want them to go down. I only wanted these two to be on their own row. So you could make your CSS more specific and say, okay, I just want the images here, these two. What are they inside of, or what class name do they have? So I could say .main image, and it would work. Or I could say the image inside of this main element would work. So I could say something like, only the images inside main do I want to have that display block, and then these ones won't be affected. Okay, so there's a way you can just change them. So they're not, now they're still only taking up as much space, but they are getting a new carriage return, and they are taking up all the width, even though their border stays within their picture. Okay, centering. Students always like to center. It's a good layout to know about. What if I wanted to center the word Moab in the page? I could do something like this. I could say, okay, just let's target the H2, which is where Moab is, and I could say text align center. This is one way to center things. And it will center it in the page. So no, Moab is centered in the page. Now, the only reason it's centered in the page, though, is because it centered it inside the content it was in. So what text align center does is it will center the content within the container. It's an H1 block level element. The container goes all the way from here to here, and it's going to center that content inside of there. Okay. But if I give that H2 a width of maybe 600 pixels, you'll see this. It's still centered inside of its container, but now its container is smaller and it's not centered on the page anymore. Okay, so be aware you're going to have to do this. So now how do we center a container itself? We have to use the term margin 0 auto. And that's going to take a container and center it on the page. So now we had to do two things. We had to center the text inside of it and center the actual item. So then you might say, okay, well, I want to center those pictures. In fact, let's take off the second one. It served its purpose. And we want to take that one picture and center it on the page. So you say, oh, okay, well, it's the same picture here. So I'll say text align center. And that's the wrong thing to do, but I want to show you what happens. Because that's centered. It's centering inside the borders. So this whole picture is taking up every single bit inside those borders. So it probably is centered in there. There's just no space around it. So that's centering the content or the contents, not the container. So that will not work with elements like that. You need to put margin, just like we did with the other one, 0 auto. Okay, so what is margin 0 auto doing? See, there we go. Now we're centered. So what does margin 0 auto mean? Okay, if we take a look, and I did this on the board in class. It was so nice to walk to the board. I'm going to turn on I'm going to right click and say inspect. Maybe. Oh, there we go. And it's going to open up. Notice what's so cool. Under the Elements tab, you can find that image, and you'll see this box model. That's what they call this. This is showing the contents, the padding, the border. See how the border went kind of orange? And the margining there. And we can look and see what's going on there. When we say margin 0 auto, you'll see the top and bottom have a dash, meaning there's no margin, 0. But the right and left have 115. So what it's saying is the first value is top and bottom, 0. The second value is auto, meaning automatically take whatever space there is and put the same amount on either side. And that's what's centering it. Okay, so going with margining and padding really quick, look at Moab, for example. It looks really close, in fact, all the paragraphs. So let's take, this Moab, if we wanted to give some margining or padding to it, we can do a couple different things. So let's find the H2 here. And did you guys know you can actually add stuff here? You can turn things off. So you could take off the width or take off the margining and see how it looks. It doesn't actually change your code, but you could play around in here and do some different things. You can even type in a new number, want it to be a little wider than you had it or whatever. Whoops. So there's lots of cool things you can do. Make sure you know how to do the right click and inspect and get into this element tab in your developer tools, because it's going to really help you out a lot. All right, so Moab, we don't have much space on the bottom or right. We have lots of space on the bottom or top. We have lots on the right and left because we've centered it. But if we wanted to give it a little more space, we could say padding, and we could say just give it one value, 40 pixels. And that's going to give it 40 pixels all the way around. You don't see it much on the right and left because it's already centered, but you definitely see the 40 pixels above and below. So one value, and then if we inspect that with our little thing here, we see we have 40 all the way around. If I rest my mouse pointer over, I can see exactly that green is the padding. Now we only have 75 on the right and left for that margin 0 auto. Okay, if we do two different values, it's just like this one, top, bottom, left, right, we could say I only want 5 pixels on the top and bottom padding, but I want 40 on the right and left. Again, this is a bad one to probably show because it's an H2. But now if I go back here and reload the page, we'll see we have 5 on the top and bottom, whoops, and 40 on the sides. Right, so that's it. So now you're saying, well, that's padding. What's the difference with margining? Margining is on the outside of the element. See how it's on the outside of the red? But padding is on the inside of the element. And sometimes when you turn off the borders, it's hard to really tell that padding and margining do anything different sometimes. But if you realize that's what's happening, margining is on the inside of the element, and padding's on the inside of the element, margining is on the outside between other elements. So there's a really good look at the 0 auto at work there. Okay, so that's the box model. We'll probably talk about the box model again, but it's good to kind of know what's going on with those right from the beginning. Okay, so we saw how to center a few different elements, whether they're block or inline, and text align center is the content, margin 0 auto is the container itself. So those are good ones to remember. Another thing you're going to be doing in your homework this week is you're going to be taking your page and kind of separating it from the body. Because right now, all this white here is kind of the body. So if we come in here, and I like to order my CSS kind of in how you see the HTML come in. So I'm going to put body up here, and if we give it a background color of light blue, you'll see it kind of shows everything where the body is. The body is kind of everything, right? So everything is light blue. If I had a really big banner picture or something like this, and someone went to my website, it would just be like huge and kind of like in your face. And so we want to kind of have a separate container to make sure our website doesn't get too wide and it looks manageable, it looks good. So we're going to make a little separate container. So you'll see in your homework, Brother Thompson will have you put in here this div with the ID of content. And pretty much it has everything that's in the body because it's right underneath the opening body and it ends right here, right below, whoops, my goodness. It ends right here, right before the ending body text. So it's pretty much everything in there. And the reason we do that is so we can have it kind of be separate. So if we target that and say content, and let's just give it kind of that same red border. We can kind of see it. And it's pretty much everything in the body. It does have a little bit of space because it probably, your browser has a little bit of internal CSS that does that. But it's pretty much whatever the body is, right? So we can do now separate things with that. It's its own separate little container. And we could say now, let's give it the background color. I should just copy and paste, of white. And now you'll see, you can still see a little bit of blue of the body, but the container is a separate element and you can do other things with it. So now we can give it a width, and I think he has you do like 960 pixels or something like that. And now you'll see, you can really see it coming out and being its own little container, which is really cool. Now, how do we center this? Okay, it's a div and it has a width. And before we gave it this width, if we tried to center it, it would have looked like it was already centered because it was the whole width of the page, right? But now that we've given it a smaller width, we can come in here and say margin 0 auto, and it's going to center that on the page and it looks much nicer. If you have a ginormous monitor, it's never going to get bigger, or the width is always, actually the width is always going to stay 960. I think Brother Thompson has you guys put max width, which means later if I make it responsive or something like that, it's never going to get bigger than 960 pixels. For us, it looks kind of the same, but that's kind of the same idea. So you'll see it looks very similar. Okay, so even if their monitor is 2,000 pixels wide, it's never going to be bigger than 960 pixels, which is still kind of small, especially on a big monitor, but it looks pretty good on laptops. Okay, but now notice we've got some issues with this home link being really close to the edge and the paragraph starting to look funny. We will solve all of that in a later homework for your dry or your whitewater rafting homepage, so don't worry how ugly that is in your homework. But if you did want to kind of play around with it, I would suggest coming into your About Me page and doing whatever you want. So if I did want to say, oh, those, all those look really small, so let's just give, well, maybe I should just do one at a time. We'll say, let's look at the nav. And this is what we did. I did this in class and I actually made a mistake, but it was good. So I said, margin, I need a little space above home. I said, give me some margin of 40 pixels all the way around. And what happened was it went outside of the element and it gave me some extra space in the blue. Well, that's not what I wanted. I wanted a little white space. So what should I have said? I should have said padding, because padding is inside. So see, there is a difference with padding and margining, especially if you've got different colors and borders, you can see that. Now I can do the same thing maybe with paragraph. Maybe I wanted the same thing, so I could say comma, also paragraph. And I could give them a little, and now I see, oh, that's way too much on the top and bottom, so maybe I'll take the paragraph out here and I'll say, okay, with the paragraphs, I only wanted padding maybe just 5 pixels on the top and bottom, but on the right and left, I will leave it 40 pixels because that looked good. Okay, so you can play around with it and kind of figure that out. But again, you're going to be putting this padding and some of these different things and centering in later assignments, but I did bring in the centering part because it is good to know with block and inline block elements. That's what you were learning this week. But just do what's on the homework. Don't make your page any prettier than whatever it tells you to do. Just leave it how it is. We eventually will get it pretty, don't worry. Okay, some things students ask me is, why are there little lines, and it's really tiny, but there's little lines in between the social media icons. That's because if you look at the links up here, every time it sees the A tag, the ones that do hypertext reference links, it will underline them automatically. It's one of those internal CSS things. So you can turn that off. So you could say something like, well, I want all the A tags. Actually, let's put it down here. It doesn't matter where it's at, actually. I want that text, it's called text decoration none, and that turns off that underlining. And then it takes that little underline off between the social media icons. However, it took them off also up here. So again, I might have just wanted the social media links, and you can come down here and say, okay, what's a parent of them? Oh, it's social. That one kind of nests all those inside of it, so I could put class social dot social a, and it would leave the underline here, but take off those little underlines that were between there. Okay, so that was one question I get from students. Also, notice that we have a link that's not part of our website. So most of these would probably just go to our own website's pages, and it stays within the same tab when you do that. And I don't even know if I have any pages. Yeah, they're not working, but it does stay in the same tab. You can see that those links, and that's what you want. If it's your own website, it will stay in its own browser tab. It won't open a new tab. But if they're going outside of your website, like you have a link that takes them, this one happens to be discovermoab.com, which is not my website. You don't want it to replace your website and open it up in the same tab. You want it to open up in a new tab, and this was from the last class, but I will click on it and you'll see up in here in my browser that it will open a new tab, and it left mine here to the left open. That's what you want. It's kind of a marketing thing. You don't want them to ever leave your website. You want them to still get access to it. Of course, they could have hit the back button and gone back there, but it's just good practice to do that. So what in code do you need to do to make a new tab like that? Because the default is to replace the tab. So what you want to do, anywhere that's going outside of your website, like the social media ones, you want to put a new attribute inside the A, the hypertext reference element. It says target is the name of the attribute, and the value is underscore blank in quotes. And that's it means a blank new tab is how I try to think of it. The default is self, and that's going to replace the same tab that you were on. But if it goes to an external site, you want to put target, and you'll notice right here in this Moab one, that's why it was going to a new tab. So that is an attribute you do have to add if you want it to open up a new tab in your browser, and that's good practice to do when it's an external web page that's not your own. Okay? And then yeah, up here you'll notice there's no target attribute at all. Oh, this one is. This one goes to a different one. Okay. I think that was about all we did in class. We got out a little early, and hopefully that helps you out with your homework to get started. But do realize you do have some Khan Academy videos and other things to do this week, so lots to do, and we'll see you hopefully on Zoom on Thursday. Thanks, guys.